Just to give us a little bit of Annabel's history, she completed her Reiki first degree in 1989, received initiation as a master in 1991. She joined Reiki Australia's professional standards team in 2003 and was also chair of the Reiki Australia board from 2005 to August 2012. From almost 40 years working initially as a social worker and later as an organisational consultant with a focus on individual management and team effectiveness, Annabel brought a broad range of skills to Reiki Australia. Her recent work on the professional development team has included contributing to the development of a revised code of professional conduct and 2 training modules to assist Reiki treatment practitioners meet higher standards, thereby qualifying for Reiki Australia's accredited Reiki treatment practitioner membership category.
I want to tell you a little bit about how I became a member of Reiki Australia, because I'm not one of the founding members, and how I became a member is actually quite relevant to the sort of things that we're doing here today and to the public consultation that Reiki Australia ran for a couple of years that Lynette has certainly talked about. I've had a Reiki practice, predominantly a teaching practice, for as long as I've been a Reiki master, since 1991, but it's always been along with something else that I've done to earn my living. Reiki's never been my full-time practice. And one of the things that I have done from time to time is participate in body, mind and spirit festivals, those sorts of things that come around from time to time. And in, I think it was 2003 or 2004, I had offered to do some Reiki practice at a festival in the Atherton Tablelands, which is where I live in Queensland. And then I got a notification from the people who were running the festival saying that anybody who intended to put their hands on other people must have insurance. Well, I'd never heard about insurance for Reiki, and I had no idea at all. It must have been 2003, I think, about how you even got it. But to be able to participate in this festival, I had to have insurance. So I started to inquire around, and I talked to people who had insurance for other practices. And one of the things that came about was that one had to be a member of a professional association to have insurance for Reiki practice. Well, I didn't even know there were any professional associations for Reiki. So then I had to find out about where they were, and Google wasn't in those days, so I couldn't Google it. But somehow or another, and I can't remember how, I actually did find the Australian Reiki Connection, thank you, ARC. And so I joined ARC and duly got my insurance and was able to work at putting my hands on bodies. And I was a member of ARC for 2 or 3 years. But during that 2 or 3 years, the national consultation that Reiki Australia was doing was happening in the area, or fairly near the area where I lived. And as I think Lynette was talking about earlier this morning, there was a lot of talk around in those days about registration for Reiki practice and standards for Reiki practice, and I had assumed, along with other people, that that meant the teaching practice. I'd never really even thought about the fact that there was anything beyond just teaching Reiki and doing hands-on, but it interested me to see what these people were saying when there was a consultation meeting that I was able to get to. I talked to somebody in ARC about it, because I'd never heard of Reiki Australia. The lady said, "Oh, they're a bit of a strange bunch of people." But anyway, I'd sort of committed to go by that stage. So I went along, and I was tremendously impressed with the sort of things that they were talking about, the sort of clarification that Wendy's been making this morning about the difference between the teaching practice and the personal practice, the teaching and personal practice and professional practice, and what professional practice actually meant, and the importance of making sure that people who were working professionally actually had knowledge and skills that we don't need for our personal practice. And the people who were there, which did include Lynette, were really professional. And my background at that time, I was the staff development officer at a private hospital in Cairns. One of the things that had come in to vogue within the past very short period of time was the idea of competency-based training, which, you know, now is very familiar to people, but in those days was not. And so that meant that you looked at what people were actually doing to do their job, what were the skills and what were the knowledge that they needed to be able to do their job. And if you actually want to teach someone how to do that job, then you need to be teaching them to use those skills and knowledge. So I realised that what Reiki Australia was talking about was sort of competency-based training for treatment practitioners, Reiki treatment practitioners. And so I was excited by this. I thought this is really interesting. And so then and there, that day, or that 2 days, I can't remember, but they had application forms there, so I joined Reiki Australia. And I wrote down on my application form, when they said, what skills did you have? I wrote about developing standards, you know, for painters and occupational therapists and people like that who worked in private hospitals. And guess what? They asked me if I would, yes, Carol knows, they asked me if I would join the professional standards team, so I think I was probably on the professional standards team within about a week of joining Reiki Australia. And I've, well, it's changed its name to the professional development team now because we have a broader focus now, but I've been on that team ever since. And eventually I had to think about, did I want dual membership of Reiki organisations in Australia, and I decided that wasn't necessary, so I gave up my membership of ARC and stayed with Reiki Australia. So I'm telling you that because, you know, some of you might have the same feeling by the end of this afternoon. Decide that you would like to join Reiki Australia if you're not already a member of Reiki Australia. So that's a bit of a commercial. So my presentation today, what I've been asked to talk about is professional Reiki treatment standards, and then the subheading is requirements, trends and new initiatives for Reiki treatment practitioners, so specifically for Reiki treatment practitioners. So the first thing that I have said that I would talk about is the current requirements and trends, and there are two current requirements and trends that are very current at the moment. One is the New South Wales Code of Conduct, which Wendy has talked about to some degree, and while it says 2008, it actually is still like currently being dealt with, and I'll talk more about that. And the second thing is a government review of complementary and alternative medicines, which is the CAM review, which is very, very current at the moment. So I'll talk about both of those things under that heading. Now, some of this is repeating what other people have already said, but I won't repeat it all, and I will expand on things a little bit. So, and it doesn't hurt, I think, to be repetitive with some of these things. In 2008, the New South Wales government introduced a code of conduct for unregistered health practitioners. And unregistered health practitioners was defined by Wendy. It's anyone who's working in any kind of a public situation in a health-related capacity whose profession doesn't require them to be registered. Like nurses are registered, doctors are registered, pharmacists are registered, pharmacists are registered. There are quite a number of registered professions, but all the rest of the people who do health-related things, which includes us if we're doing public treatment practice, would be considered to be unregistered health practitioners. So in New South Wales, when those codes were introduced in 2008, that had an immediate impact on anyone who was a Reiki treatment practitioner in New South Wales. They suddenly were required to meet particular standards, required by law to meet particular standards, including some things which now we ask our practitioner members to do, like displaying their code of ethics in their treatment facilities, like where they do their practice. And there are a number of things like that that became law, but also there were other things like needing to have first aid training and some workplace health and safety requirements that many people would not have known about before, perhaps. Infection control and things like that became part of what was required of unregistered treatment practitioners, unregistered health practitioners, including Reiki treatment practitioners in New South Wales. Now, second thing that happened there was that an assumption was made, because this was the intention, as Wendy said, that once it was introduced in New South Wales as a pilot study, that would quickly spread to other states. And so we spread the word in Reiki Australia that now that these standards had been introduced in New South Wales, it was only a fairly short matter of time before it would be a national standard. And so we started to kind of inform our members, particularly our practitioner members, that this was a change that we could see happening, and we started to look at what do we need to do to support our practitioners in doing this. And one of the... I think I'm jumping ahead just a little bit. That didn't happen as quickly as we expected, and one of the reasons, as Steve was saying earlier, that it didn't happen as quickly as expected is even though there was very broad agreement across the states that standards were needed, the nature of those standards, like the difference between national and state legislation, sometimes meant that what might have been included in national legislation didn't suit some of the states. So several of the states started to look, and still are looking, at their own legislation and introducing their own legislation, which is likely to be fairly similar to the original New South Wales legislation, but it hasn't happened as quickly as we expected. Steve's nodding away there, so that suggests to me that he thinks it will happen. The next thing that happened is that in 2011, the Australian Health Workforce Ministerial Council, which is the health ministers from all the different states, and Federal Health Minister, which is an ongoing group of people, established an inquiry into whether it should in fact be a national standard, whether there should be a national standard. And there's a group of, it's kind of a loose telephone group of Reiki membership organisations across Australia that meet from time to time to talk about, and Reiki Australia is part of this, that meet from time to talk about things that are happening in the Reiki industry. So this was one of the things that we had some telephone consultations about, and we decided that we needed to, the different organisations needed to make submissions as part of this inquiry, and there was very general agreement among the Reiki organisations that we supported the idea of standards, national standards. And so a number of We Reiki organisations did in fact make those submissions to that inquiry, all supporting it. Even though that hasn't yet come about, one of the agreements that did come about through I can change screens now, forget this. It's a bit multi-skilling, this. One of the things that did come about from the discussions with the telephone group was that every one of the organisations that participate in that group agreed that the New South Wales standards should be considered to be the minimal standards for treatment practitioners in Australia. So we've acted on that in a variety of ways. One of the ways that we have acted on it in Reiki Australia is to upgrade our code of professional conduct. Everybody in Reiki Australia has to sign our code of ethics, but treatment practitioners had another code, which is a code of professional conduct, which they were also required to abide by, which was beyond the code of ethics and was to do with some of the things even that you were asking questions about earlier today, like what a treatment practitioner is expected to do and is expected to not do. So we looked at the New South Wales codes. We identified some things that were not included in our codes, like the requirement for people to have first aid training, some of the workplace health and safety stuff. I think from memory the infection control stuff wasn't in our codes. So we actually expanded our code of professional conduct to incorporate the standards from New South Wales that were not yet in ours. So we now have an upgraded code of professional conduct, which is a requirement. At the moment, it's a requirement for the accredited Reiki treatment practice category of membership. We have 2 practitioner membership bodies at the moment, membership categories. One is practitioner category, like treatment practitioner. The other one is the accredited Reiki treatment practitioner. And I'll talk a little bit more about those two why those are different and what those differences are in just a minute. So that was one of the things that we did. We upgraded the code and we introduced the accredited Reiki treatment practitioner category. And it's for practitioners who are able to meet those standards, like to abide by those standards. Now that's just a Reiki Australia membership category. It's not a national accreditation, but it's a Reiki Australia accreditation. And I meant to ask Coralie or Carol before I started this, the grandparenting period, date of expiry? End of April this year. Okay. We included in that a grandparenting period, because we have a lot of practitioner members in Reiki Australia who are very experienced, have many years of experience in their treatment practice, some of whom have other qualifications as well, like nursing or massage or other qualifications where they would already have needed to be abiding by infection control and workplace health and safety requirements, and would know first aid. And so we have a grandparenting period which would enable people who have a certain number of years of practice and can demonstrate that they actually have those skills to actually just move straight into the ARTP category. So that's still current, and at the moment, we even have some people who've put in an application for. They have to start by being a member of Reiki Australia. They're not coming right off the street. But people who've joined Reiki Australia and who maybe have needed to have worked for Reiki Australia for a long enough period to comply with the grandparenting requirements. Some of them are kind of waiting. They're in the practitioner category, but they're waiting to be able to move over into the ARTP category. Many of us, like me, for example, had all the other requirements except that I didn't have first aid, so I had to get a first aid certificate to be able to make that leap from the practitioner category to the ARTP category. So if people are interested in that later, Carol would be able to give you the information about what are the requirements for grandparenting from practitioner category into ARTP, because that is still currently possible. And then from then on, there will be another way that people get into that category, which I'm also going to talk about. So the other thing that I mentioned when I was introducing this, what are some of the new things that are happening, was the government review of complementary and alternative medicines. And this is very current. In the mid-year budget last year, the federal government announced that it was going to cease subsidising certain natural health therapies, natural health practices, and they commissioned a review into what they called the clinical effectiveness of natural therapies. And this is the CAM review, which is ongoing at the moment until I think March, the end of March this year. Now, Reiki Australia hasn't in fact qualified for health subsidies for, I think, since 2008. Reiki practitioners haven't qualified for health subsidies since 2008, but we had been kind of working towards the idea that we can get our credibility with the health funds and have that happen, which hasn't quite happened yet because it required an audit was done of Reiki Australia, and it required that we had educational things in process or in practice that our practitioners needed to abide by. We had codes of ethics and we had other things in place, but the education was one of the things that we didn't. So this thing has put a little bit of an uncertainty on where that's all going. But what we're doing right at the moment is sourcing research papers on the impact of the impact of Reiki treatment. And we will put together a presentation, a submission to the CAM review, supporting the idea that Reiki has got some clinical effectiveness. There's some evidence of clinical effectiveness. Now, we don't have a definition for what clinical effectiveness exactly means to this review, but we have a couple of people who are helping with our research, who do have good research backgrounds, who are able to look at the studies and kind of make judgments about, is this something that would have credibility with people who are scientific in their orientation or not. And so we'll actually write our submission around the most convincing of the research papers that we can lay our hands on. So those things are really very much ongoing at the moment. The second topic, which was in the little blurb about what I would be talking about today, was how does Reiki Australia support Reiki treatment practitioners? And the three things that I thought to talk about would be just simply membership of a professional body, the development of Reiki treatment standards, and conferences and events, some of which has already been partially covered by our other two presenters. One of the things about membership of a professional body is that it does give some credibility. I forget your name, I'm sorry, but your question before. Helen's question about how do the public make judgments about whether somebody is a credible practitioner or not. One of the ways that we know that people sometimes do make those judgments is by looking on the internet now, finding Reiki associations, finding that some people in their area are listed as professional treatment practitioners or as Reiki masters. And I certainly personally, and quite a few of our members have had the experience of people contacting them either wanting a master, wanting to do Reiki training, or wanting a treatment practitioner, and they will say, I found you on the website, you're in my area, I found you on the website, I looked at other websites and yours looked very professional. And, you know, can I talk to you about doing Reiki training or whatever? But certainly that link to a professional body is a very helpful way of developing credibility. And so some of the things that we try to do with Reiki Australia is to make sure that we are giving our professional practitioners, which it means our treatment practitioners, but our professional members also include our Reiki masters, the opportunity to be able to be found via our website. So that if people are using that approach, then that's a way that they can do it. Until there is actually legislative requirement for treatment practice, that's the main way that people are going to be able to find out. So, some of the things that we also can do as a membership organisation is industry representation, which the other two have talked about at quite a deal of length this morning, so that the government bodies, for example, know that we're there, and sometimes will actually ask us for a view on something, even if we haven't found out that they're doing an inquiry, and that we're kind of proactively going to let them know what we think anyway. So that's one of the things that we can do as a professional body. Another thing that we can do is to just, and do is update our members whenever something is happening that's got an impact, it's got relevance for Reiki practice. So we have in touch bulletins that go out very regularly, not on any particular kind of regular basis, but whenever there's something that needs to be brought to the attention of our members and or to our professional members, that gets sent around to those members. There are other things to do with becoming or being a member of a professional body, which is to do with benefits, member benefits that can be offered to people who are in the organisation. So some of the things that Reiki Australia offers, Carol and Coralie have recently, and I think a couple of assistant others, have recently negotiated a very favourable insurance deal with Fenton Green. So before that, there were other insurance groups that many of us we had our professional indemnity and our public liability insurance with, but Fenton Green were able to give us a cheaper rate by quite some amount, as you know, as we've changed over our insurance from one to another. It's been quite pleasant to see the difference, the positive difference. And the other thing about Fenton Green is that they actually give a $15 a head bonus to Reiki Australia for the members who actually take up their insurance. So, I mean, it certainly benefits us, but it certainly benefits us as personal practitioners as well in terms of our own insurance costs. Some of the member benefits also include business support, and anyone who's in the professional categories, which is the Reiki Master category and also the treatment practitioner categories, is entitled to a web page on the Reiki Australia. Not the Master? Only practitioners. Okay, well, it's good that we're talking about practitioners today then, isn't it? Sorry, any masters that were just getting excited about that. Yeah.
It's about professional Reiki treatments.
Okay, yep. So there is an opportunity for people, and we certainly encourage people, like there are some people who still just have a listing with they're listed anyway, whether they have asked for it or not, but it will have their name and their contact details and that sort of thing. But we're also entitled to have a photograph, a little blurb about our practice, a little blurb about our attitudes to, you know, where are we going with our Reiki practice. And again, I know that sometimes people will make a choice about who they contact between someone who has nothing but a contact listing and someone who's actually got a photograph and some information about themselves. So people like to be able to look at those, and that's part of what they pay as their fee for that category of membership. So it's not something that that they have to pay extra for, or we have to pay extra for. The little brochure that's coming around is part of our business support. This was a brochure that was developed a few years ago by Reiki Australia for Reiki practitioners to be able to give to clients or potential clients, so that they have an idea of what Reiki is about, what it involves, what will happen in a Reiki treatment. And there's a space where you can actually put your own details on that, so you can have those brochures and you can personalise them to a degree. Another thing which hopefully none of us will ever have to deal with is that we do have a formal complaint handling mechanism process in Reiki Australia, so that should somebody make a complaint about your practice and you're a member of Reiki Australia, then Reiki Australia has a process to be able to actually investigate that. Now, in the 7 years that I was on the board, we have only had one complaint about Reiki Australia members. So it's not something that happens every day, but as Wendy said, there have been complaints about other Reiki people out there in the community where people have questioned something that a practitioner has done as part of theoretically a Reiki treatment, which has seemed a bit dicey, and Reiki Australia has been asked to give an opinion, which has actually come to a court appearance, about the acceptability of that. Is that part of, in fact, is that a legitimate part of a Reiki treatment? So, and in the case of the complaint that we've had, we could say to the complainant, this person is covered by our code of ethics. It appears that it's not a breach of the code of ethics, but here's a copy of the code of ethics, and if you want to make a formal complaint, because it wasn't a formal complaint, this is how you do it. So we actually told the person how they could make a formal complaint, but they didn't in the end, because they could see that what they were complaining about was not an ethical issue, and it wasn't a breach of any code that this person was covered by, so it hasn't gone any further. So there's some protection there as a member if something like that should happen.
Was it a complaint about hand placement?
No. But the ones that went to court were, in a sort of a way. Yeah. There's a lot more information, some more information about member benefits on the Reiki Australia website, and if you wanted to follow that up on the home page, just click on the link to membership, and there's a section then that talks about membership benefits. And also Carol's here today, so you might want to ask her questions too when we're having a break. The next thing that I want to talk about is the history of the development of standards for Reiki treatment. Again, this has been addressed to some degree already by our presenters, so I'll not spend too long on some of these things. Both Lynette and Wendy have talked about the 2003 National Conference. Now, I wasn't in Reiki Australia at that stage, but that was a conference where some of the information that had been gathered at the 2001 conference and in the national consultation meetings was actually sort of, it started to be formed into standards, or formed into ideas about standards that might be relevant. And by 2004, I was on the professional standards team, and what was happening very actively by the time I joined the team was that the team was actually developing standards, a Certificate 4 and a diploma level course for Reiki treatment practice. And we actually developed a draft 1 qualification at both those 2 levels, and it was submitted for inclusion or for potential inclusion in the review of what happens with the health training packages is they're reviewed every X number of years, and when they're being reviewed then there's the opportunity for new practices to be included, and that was what we were hoping would happen. So draft 1 was submitted. It then went up for public consultation, and the Skills Council had a number of responses to that from other Reiki organisations that wanted to have input into the qualification. I just would like to say in Reiki Australia's favour that there had been invitations to the other Reiki organisations prior to the development of draft 1, but I think that for most of them it was like, oh, this is a bit like, I was thinking, why would you want to do that? This is before I got into Reiki Australia. It's probably never going to come to anything. So they hadn't taken up on the offer of being involved in that development. But then a group of, a further group of Reiki practitioners, Reiki practitioner organisations did get involved, and we formed a body which met for probably 2 years, and we expanded and revised and worked with the standards for quite some time, and we actually had a draft 2 qualification that was ready to submit, and then it didn't go ahead because some other material was submitted that hadn't gone through that consultation process, and we kind of all looked at the both lots of material, and never the twain could quite meet. So we didn't get it into the health training package, which would have meant, had we done that we already would have a national qualification for Reiki treatment practice. So we were a bit demoralised there for a while, and then we kind of got back together and thought, well, okay, what do we do next? And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute too. Reiki Australia was actually given permission by the CEO of the Community Services and Health Industry Skills Council for the draft 1 material, which we had developed alone. It didn't have input from the other Reiki organisations, that we could actually use that material for our own members' education if we wanted to. So that's been a valuable thing for us to know. I did want to just mention something about services for Reiki masters and personal practitioners, because it can sometimes seem as though what Reiki Australia's sole emphasis on is Reiki treatment practice. And it isn't, but it's been a very visible part of our role. So we do have things that we offer and have offered over the years also to Reiki masters, to people who have a personal practice and are not looking to do anything else. And obviously the Reiki Share Days, which have expanded hugely in the number and the regularity of Reiki Share Days that are happening, is one of the ways that we offer that sort of service. And there have been in the last couple of years also Reiki retreats, which have been organised by groups in different states of Australia, by local people, but supported by Reiki Australia, so that they've actually been like 2 or 3 day retreats where people can get together and share Reiki and do other things that have been included in it. So those are some of the kind of regular things that we hope that we'll be able to continue to offer for people who aren't particularly wanting to get into Reiki treatment practice. And of course, even if you are in Reiki treatment practice, you can still be part of those things. People have talked about the conferences, the 2006-2009 conferences. Those were both a balance of things to offer to treatment practitioners, but also things that were relevant to personal practitioners or masters, like to the teaching practice or to personal practice. but my focus is particularly on particularly on treatment practice. But Phyllis Leigh Furumoto, we talked about, or I think Wendy talked about before. Phyllis Leigh Furumoto and Ranga Pramaratna are both founders or lineage bearers of different Reiki practices in Australia and beyond Australia, of course, and were both present at our 2006 conference and did some things that were relevant to treatment practice and some things that were relevant to our personal practices. Pamela Miles, who was mentioned before, also did some work for Reiki Australia, like doing presentations around different parts of Australia, with the focus particularly on personal practice. I didn't talk about Marta Getty. Marta Getty, Lynette talked about as Marta being her first initiating master in her form of practice, and Marta also came to Australia in 2008 and did a series of seminars that Marta has developed called Healing the Family Tree with Reiki, which is a process using Reiki, and particularly Reiki distance treatment, to look at issues within families and to heal them. So as much as we have the resources, personal and financial, to do that, we also like to provide services for non-treatment practitioners. There are a couple of things that I need to just cover in terms of what's new, and the first of them is something that we call lineage of practice. One of the requirements for the professional membership categories, which includes, in this case, Reiki Master, but also Reiki practitioners, is a lineage traceable, a lineage of initiation traceable to Mikao Usui. Now, in the past, that was the criterion that most Reiki organisations used to be able to tell whether someone was actually practising Reiki, because the only really criterion for whether it's Reiki or not is, does it stem from the teachings of Mikao Usui? Because Mikao Usui actually gave it the name Reiki. There are many people in Australia and other parts of the world who are actually doing hands-on healing practice in various ways. And some of them will say, oh, I do Reiki as well. And the difference is that if they haven't learnt a practice which actually stems from Mikao Usui, it's not actually Reiki, even though it may be very similar, it may be even drawing on the same energy, who knows. But we have a practice which is a system of ways of doing things based on a particular person's original practice. And so to find out whether someone is practicing Reiki or something else, we need to find out, is this linked to Mikao Usui? Can we find that link? Well, that used to be okay in the early days of Reiki, when there was only kind of pretty much one form of practice existing. But over time, people have kind of changed the practice and changed the name and developed a new practice of their own, which is all fine. But along with that, sometimes the lineage information has got lost. Many people that I talk to nowadays have never been given a lineage of initiation. They don't know how their own Reiki master who initiated them can track back to eventually Mikao Usui. And the longer time goes on, the more that's lost, the more impossible it is going to be for people to actually be able to retrieve that information. So we were getting, and as I know that other Reiki organisations have been, getting applicants who didn't have a traceable lineage and had gone back to their Reiki master and had tried to get maybe their Reiki master had died or disappeared, or maybe that person didn't know a traceable lineage. So we didn't want to disadvantage people who we were pretty sure were actually Reiki practitioners, so we had to look for something else. And lineage of practice is what we decided to do. A practice of Reiki, a form of Reiki, normally has a description of what that entails, like how do you do a treatment, how long should people wait between one level of Reiki and the next. The Reiki precepts are sometimes expressed differently. Some things are sometimes included in some practices that are not included in other practices. But what we've sought to do is to get authorised descriptions of practices from the current lineage bearer or the current founder of a practice that we can actually use as, okay, this is what Usui Shiki Ryoho, according to Phyllis Furumoto, looks like. And we also developed something that we've called Western form. We've looked at a whole range of Reiki forms and drawn out the commonality in all of those forms, like how many initiations, something about the precepts, you know, that there are precepts, that there is some sort of a history that normally includes Mikao Usui. And what we do is if somebody can't produce a lineage, a traceable lineage, we ask them to describe their practice. And if anyone has actually joined Reiki Australia fairly recently, you'll have discovered that the application forms have now become a little more complex, a little longer, but what we've included in that is in fact a description of practice. So we don't have to go back to people and say, well, you know, we need to get a description of your practice because we've normally got it. And then we can look at that in accordance with the descriptions, the authorised descriptions of practice that we have, and we can say, okay, it's obvious that this person is practicing Reiki, even though they don't have a lineage of practice, because they're doing all these things that fit into the authorised descriptions. So then we say, okay, you have a lineage of practice which says what you are practicing is a form of Reiki, and therefore, you know, we can accept you into our professional category. We need to make it clear that lineage of practice is a Reiki Australia concept, and there's no guarantee that any other. We hope eventually we'll be able to kind of sell the idea to other Reiki organisations as well, so that, because people are going to be disadvantaged if they can't join a Reiki organisation and they want to. But at the moment it's a concept that applies to Reiki Australia, so it's not a concept that would necessarily be accepted somewhere else. But it does mean that people can come into our categories. When the grandparenting period for the ARTP category finishes in April, the way that people will get into that category is to be able to complete a training program. The training program we have already developed. It's an internal training program. It's not a national training program. It will be a Reiki Australia internal training. It's a 2-module program. The first of them covering communication skills for people who are working in a health setting, and the second of them covering the requirements for workplace health and safety, infection control and those sorts of things. And somebody who completes that training will have demonstrated their ability to meet the current New South Wales standards. So we're actually giving people a way of meeting those standards, which we actually firmly believe will become national, and that will be the way that we get people into the ARTP category once the grandparenting period finishes. And the advantage in that, apart from just meeting the standards, is that by having those skills and knowledge, people actually are able to provide a safer, more nurturing experience for their clients, and also a safer experience for themselves, because we will know and they will know that they're actually complying. I mean, there already are, of course, workplace health and safety requirements for you, whether or not there are specific health standards, every practitioner in any kind in any state is required to meet some workplace health and safety standards and things. So we're looking at those with people. And so what we're actually doing today is formally launching the first of the modules of the ARTP 101 training program, which is called Effective Professional Relationships. It covers communication skills, and both of the modules, when they're ready, will be able to be completed by external study, which means that people anywhere in Australia will be able to take them up. They don't need to be somewhere where there is actually where there's actually someone who is qualified to facilitate that course.